Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to ESO Vault. I have another build video for you today, and that's Death Strike, a dual wield and two-handed Necromancer. This build is probably as complex as anything I'm going to give you, but don't hold me to that. Now this isn't a meta build. I do off-meta stuff around here for those that don't know that. But this is closer to the meta in the choice of two-handed sword as a backbar weapon. Necromancer is fairly difficult to play, in my opinion, as an average gamer. And I'm going to add a layer of complexity to this by the gear selection. But, as always, all the gear is optional. You can run other gear, but keep the same skills and rotation. I think my next video is actually going to offer a simpler alternative. I'm going to be doing the classic heavy attack pet sword. And I'm going to be sprinkling in 1-bar heavy attack builds as an alternative to the 2-bar setups that are actually what I prefer. I have to acknowledge, though, that the melee-focused builds that I love to play aren't for everybody. But I just can't forget the sword-wielding spellcasters from the books I read as a kid. Picture Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings. The staff was ever present, but if there was serious fighting, out came the sword. I'm one of those people that has to play the game with a certain sense of style, whether that's playing mostly melee damage dealers or spending hours working on my character's appearance. I'm interested in more than playing what's strongest or easiest or whatever. Having said that, I also have to say, I like my shit to work. So any build I give you works, and by works I mean that it can get through the majority of the PvE content in the game. Alright, that's more than enough introductory stuff. Let's get into the build. I can't believe I'm giving you 2 Nords in a row. That's a fluke. That's not even my favorite race. Actually, I prefer Dark Elves. I think I like their story arc the most. But hey, play the race you want to play. Now you guys can look up the racial passives and see what they are if you want to roll a new character especially suited to the role. Maybe avoid Breton. They have absolutely no bonuses that will help a stamina damage dealer. While I'm here, I'll show you that my food buff is lavafoot soup and salt rice, and I'm using the Thief Mundus Stone. Up top you can see I've got 64 points in stamina. Stats look a lot like the Templar I just did. Health is 20,000 and stamina is 30,000. Stamina recovery is 1,300. Weapon damage is 4,000-ish and crit chance is 37%. Now both weapon damage and critical chance get a buff from potions of weapon power. Make them, buy them, but you've got to get them somehow. Most characters can't run without them. Not run well, that is. Along with that, you have to level the alchemy skill line. Why? Because you need the medicinal use passive, so you can drink another potion as soon as the one that's active runs out. If you're not using potions for difficult content, you're not going to make it. Most characters have to have them. There are exceptions. There are characters that have the major brutality and major savagery buffs built in, but this isn't one of them. Keep in mind that the numbers here are all influenced by champion points. If you have a lot, your character sheet will resemble this one. Okay, let's move on from the character sheet to the skills. Now I told you about my preference for melee builds, and this is definitely a melee build. As a matter of fact, this is all melee all the time. With dual wield up front and a two-handed back bar, there isn't a ranged option here. There can be, but I'll get into that later. This setup is in fact the current meta for Stam builds. I'm not really following the meta here though. I'm mostly interested in showing you guys how the two-handed sword can fill the same role as a staff or a bow does on other builds. This build does require light attack weaving, but it's not a requirement that you do it well unless you're going to be trying to get on the leaderboard sometime soon. Just hit that light attack button and then hit the button of the skill you want to use. Don't worry about whether the light attack registered or not. This is the most important section of the video because regardless of your level, the gear you have, or your champion points, you can work on getting your skills slotted and practicing the rotation. The skills of the rotation will apply to different gear sets, character levels, whatever. What I'm going to describe to you is what's called a static rotation. I don't change it, I just repeat it over and over again. The pros use what's called a dynamic rotation, where they refresh the damage over time skills exactly as they expire. Dynamic rotations are extremely difficult. Even if you have the ability to do them, if you're new to the game, I think you should start by doing static rotations at first. You've got to walk before you can run. Don't complicate your first experiences with 2-bar builds by trying to do dynamic rotations. And speaking of complicating the experience, I think Necromancers can be fairly difficult to play. But the good news is that if I can pull it off, most of you guys can too. Alright, I'm going to move on to the actual skills. Let's look at the two-handed bar first, because that's where the rotation starts. First up is Skeletal Archer from the Gravelord skill line. This is my undead sidekick, which fires arrows that do increasing damage with each attack. After that, I use Stampede from the two-handed skill line. Stampede is a gap closer that leaves an area effect that damages enemies over time. More importantly though, on this build I get additional weapon damage by having the Infuse trait and a weapon damage enchantment on my two-handed sword. While an enemy is in the AoE that Stampede leaves on the ground, I'll get extra weapon damage as long as the skill lasts, even after I switch to my other bar. You can get the same effect with a staff using Wall of Elements or a bow using the Endless Hail skill. So if you want to change the build to another backbar weapon, go ahead. Just remember, you'll need the weapon to have the Infuse trait and a weapon damage enchantment still. After I close the gap with Stampede, I use Carve, which does bleed damage instantly and additional bleed damage over time. I also gain a small damage shield. If you change the backbar weapon, you'll need a different skill in this slot. Poison Injection with a bow or Elemental Susceptibility with a staff would work. Okay, next I use Unnerving Boneyard, which is another Gravelord skill. This does damage over time to targets in the area, and it reduces their armor by applying Major Breach. The Boneyard does 30% more damage if it's able to consume a corpse when cast. You shouldn't have to look around for corpses. The build produces its own corpses. Whenever my Skeletal Archer dies or a Blast Bones explodes, it produces a corpse. I'm getting ahead here, but you can produce a corpse right off the bat by starting every fight on the other bar with a Blast Bones skill. My heal on this bar is Resolving Vigor, which comes from doing PvP. Don't want a PvP? No worries. Slot Life Amid Death from your class skills here. You could also slot Spirit Guardian to heal you over time continuously, or if you wanted to try to get slick about it, you could slot Ruinous Scythe, which will apply off balance to the enemy. I feel like I'm complicating this too much, but I want to give you guys options, and you can decide which way you want to go with it. I'll finish up this bar by saying that my ultimate is the Glacial Colossus, which deals damage as it pounds the ground and applies Major Vulnerability for 17 seconds. Major Vulnerability will increase the damage of you and anybody in your group by 10%. Okay, now for the dual wield bar. First on this bar is my exploding skeletal friend, Blast Bones. I revisit this skill repeatedly while I'm on this bar. This does huge damage when it explodes and is the primary focus of any Necromancer build. I'll cast Blast Bones, then two other skills, then I'll recast Blast Bones. Okay, so I cast my Blast Bones, and while he's deciding what to do, I'll cast Barb Trap from the Fighters Guild skill line, and then I'll cast the dual wield skill, Deadly Cloak. Try to set Barb Trap at the feet of your enemies. Deadly Cloak travels with you, doing damage to nearby enemies while offering you protection from AoE damage. That was two skills. Now I recast Blast Bones, and then I use my spammable Rapid Strikes twice. Rapid Strikes is a channeled skill from the dual wield skill line. Because Rapid Strikes has a cast time, you'll need a slower rhythm here. I do this two more times, and then I recast Blast Bones a final time before returning to the two-handed bar. It's easy to get lost in that back and forth between Rapid Strikes and Blast Bones, but after playing the character a while, you'll get the hang of it. Feel free to replace Rapid Strikes with Venom Skull or even Silver Shards if you don't use the backbar weapon I'm using. Rapid Strikes is the one gear influence skill in this setup. With any other gear, I'd probably go with Venom Skull. Venom Skull works at range, it offers class synergies, and increasing damage with repeated casts. In short, it's a winner and an obvious choice. I have two Fighters Guild skills rounding out my dual wield bar, Flawless Dawnbreaker for passive damage, and Camouflage Hunter for the same reason, plus extra damage when I flank an enemy. I'm finished with skills at this point, but I want to give an honorable mention to Detonating Siphon, which appears in a lot of Necro builds. I don't use it because it introduces an extra positional requirement, which complicates my gameplay. Since I play melee builds all the time, I'm used to the danger of having to get close to enemies. If I use the Siphon, then I have to line myself up correctly for it to work, and that gets me killed. That's why I don't recommend Detonating Siphon. Alright, I hope I didn't lose you by giving you too many options. Stay with me and I'll put it all together as I fight Stada out here in the Alakir Desert. Stada isn't quite as easy as No Big Rhyme because she has an AoE that you'll have to interrupt. I'm not going to interrupt though because that takes me out of my rotation. I'm just going to get out of the way. I used a potion and sent a Blast Bones on its way. After that I go to the two-handed bar. As soon as I return to the dual wield bar, Pillar of Nerd set procs its damage. It'll proc again in 10 seconds. There it goes, another round of rapid strikes followed by a blast bones, and I go back to the other bar. A little while ago, they did melee builds a favor by increasing melee range to 7 meters. That's great because I can stand just outside her AoE and still do damage. I'll go ahead and use Flawless Dawnbreaker to end this thing. Damage per second worked out to be 42,000, with Rapid Strikes leading the way. That'll work for most stuff in the game. A minute ago I showed you a clip from the Ice Reach dungeon. This is from the first boss fight in that dungeon. You can see that in a good group with other players providing buffs, the damage in that fight went over 60,000. That'll show you the kind of increases to damage you'll see when running with a solid group. You can see from these numbers that you don't have to be a pro gamer to get around pretty much anywhere you want to go in the game. Getting the gear together will take you some time, but you've got a whole continent to explore. Work on skills and rotation, and run with whatever gear you can get your hands on. Speaking of gear, let's take a look at that stuff. I already spilled the beans that I was wearing Pillar of Nirn. This is S tier, best in slot gear. This comes out of the Falkreath Hold dungeon, but keep in mind, nothing says you have to do it on veteran difficulty. You only have to do it on veteran if you're trying to get the monster health. Don't have Nirn? Any set will do here. Skills and rotation stay the same. Next I've got the Maelstrom Greatsword. I was a little disappointed that I don't have the perfected version, but that's what I get for doing it so long ago. When I went back to get the new perfected versions, the sword wasn't one of the pieces I got. Oh well, if they have double drops anytime soon, I'll have to go back. The Maelstrom Sword greatly increases the damage of Rapid Strikes because each cast of Rapid Strikes is 4 attacks, and the Maelstrom's extra damage buff is applied to each of them. Don't want to grind for the Maelstrom Greatsword? Then don't. Use any two-handed sword you want here and change your spammable attack to Venom Skull. That'll do better for you in that case. Next I've got on Order's Wrath, strongest craftable gear set in the game. You can't go wrong. Buy it, make it, trade your pack mule for it, whatever. I've got on Slimecraw for the extra crit. Get used to seeing that. Biggest one-piece crit chance in the game. You get that out of Wayrest Sewers. While you're there, get the Sergeant's Mail set, and you can use that on a 1-bar pet sword. That's coming up next. And here it is, my crutch. Ever since I moved, I've been running this on everything under the sun. Velothi reduces your light attack damage to 0, which isn't a problem if that sucks anyway. On the plus side, it gives you a chunk of penetration, plus minor force, and increases your damage to monsters by 15%. You gotta jump through some hoops to get this mythic, beat some dungeon bosses, farm your brains out, and give up a couple of your kids. You know, the usual stuff. But you can run any mythic you want here, or none at all. If my connection didn't suck ass, I'd probably run Harpooner's Waiting Kilt. Alright, that's it for gear. I got a little crazy on this one. Next one will be easier, I promise. Run what you have, but keep the skills in the rotation. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Champion points are on deck. Get them filled out as you can. Blue slottables are Master at Arms, Wrathful Strikes, Fighting Finesse, and Biting Aura. And that wraps things up. I hope you found some takeaways in the video. Don't focus on the gear if you're not there in the game yet. Get the skills going, work on your gameplay, but not too hard. The main goal is to get out there and have fun. But hey, don't forget to have some situational awareness. Don't get totally absorbed in showing off your totem thingy. You never know who's lurking around. Have a great day and enjoy your adventures in Tamriel.